Welcome to Josh's Worst Nightmare Oddcast, presented by Denver Horror Collective. I'm your host, Josh Schlossberg, author of the eco-folk horror novel Charwood, out now everywhere, surveying the dark landscape of biological horror fiction. For this episode, we're being dropped in on by Dan Henk. Dan's first novel, The Black Seas of Infinity, was published by Anarchy Books in 2011. Deadite Press released the cover by Dan on a novel entitled The Soappaths by Piers Anthony. A limited edition chapbook, Christmas is Cancelled, came out courtesy of Splatterpunk in 2013. 2014, he started columns for TAM, Tattoo Review, and Skin Art magazines. Continued his work for independent magazines and anthologies. His third book, The End of the World, debuted in March. He's currently writing short stories, the latest of which, Fort Bragg, is available on Amazon. And last year, he started a podcast, Skull Sessions, with Dan Henk, which I was on recently, and now features 55 episodes, two less than me. His heavily illustrated anthology entitled The Never Dead, featuring 14 authors, just debuted across all platforms. Welcome to my nightmare, Dan.
Thank you.
Really psyched you're here. On Josh's Worst Nightmare, I invite on horror authors and artists to talk about an aspect of biological horror, which I define as living creatures and vital processes relevant to their writing. This episode, we're going to stretch things a little bit and talk about what I'm calling the biology of physics, but that's just a way of talking about physics. So what is physics, Dan, and why should we care about physics?
Well, this is kind of a made-up concept of how we address the world, like how we so is mathematics, basically. Like they say mathematics is a universal language, and we even put that like in spacecraft that we shoot way out, hoping aliens can interpret our mathematical interpretations. But the way I look at it, it's all made up by us to like assess our world. So if you have like say creatures with a whole different biology, they might not be comprehensible to them.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I took physics, I think, in high school, and I guess I must have passed it. I don't know. I don't know a ton about it. My cousin, until recently, was actually a physics high school teacher. So I've asked him things like, why, when I put the goddamn fitted sheet into the washing machine, does it get all the other clothes go inside of it? I was like, that's physics, right?
I mean, I guess like physics play a part in it. I mean, they're like smaller iterations you can bring it down to. You say it's actually this, but yeah, it is physics. I mean, you could say like gravity, you could say velocity, you could say all sorts of other stuff.
Okay,
But
so yeah,
there's smaller aspects of a greater a greater principle.
okay, so it's the natural science of matter. So biology, so obviously all of biology is affected by or follows the laws of physics, right? That's an accurate statement, you would say?
Yeah, though, like I said, a lot of those laws we made up, so there are probably portions that we left out. Like if you look at like Einstein's theory of relativity and you look at quantum mechanics, and they've been trying forever to get those, two laws. They seem to be like laws, like they seem to be something that absolutely applies, but they can't make them work together. So they've been trying forever. So there might be some more some greater, more universal theme that really helps combine those two. So we might just be taking our like brief snapshot interpretations and trying to describe it with that.
Okay. So it's still in flux in a sense. Like we're still figuring it out to a certain degree. We haven't defined the laws of it maybe as well as maybe we understand biology, although there's probably a lot of biology we still don't understand. Right. So we're just trying to still make sense of all of it. These are evolving theories.
Right, but it also might be that we don't have like the tools or the capacity to see it fully. Like for instance, like take the movie Interstellar, where it's like, we live in a 4-dimensional universe, but what if you exist in 5 dimensions? So if you're in 5 dimensions, you can see way more than you could in 4 dimensions. So 4-dimensional people would not be even able to interpret some of the stuff done by 5-dimensional people.
Okay, that's really interesting. So physics also, whatever our understanding of them, they impact physical being, but it impacts things like rocks or whatever. So obviously biology is a part of it, but it goes beyond biology. These are forces in outer space, and I guess we wouldn't call things like an asteroid biology, although I guess I don't know if that could be argued, but
It could be argued.
Yeah, and there's probably things that are
Within
on
it, yeah, like
asteroids.
spores or
Yeah.
tardigrade like creatures or something.
Sure, and things that we don't even know that's out there. But so it's clear why physics can tie so well into fiction. Most of the time when it's dealing in depth with fiction, it would be physics and fiction. It's typically sci-fi, right? Usually is what one would call
Yeah,
it.
I think so, although it kind of depends on your definition of physics, and it kind of depends on like how far you want to get it. And I think that like if you notice like a lot of like a lot of the like they call it like the hard sci-fi and stuff like that, they try and like stick to what they think are like rules or definitions or limitations, but I think all that sort of stuff is kind of made up.
Okay. Interesting. Fair enough. Yeah, well, when I think of physics in sci-fi, I think of the argument about what is the thing in Star Trek where it transport you, the transporter, what is it
Right,
called?
right.
Whatever it's called.
Right, well, you mean the transporter where like they'll see like beam me up, Scotty, and then
Yes.
but the thing is, that doesn't really work. Like their interpretation of it, where it like basically what it does is it vaporizes you, and
Right.
then like it pulls all of your atoms, up to the starship, and then it reconstructs you. And then I think it was in one of the Star Treks where somebody came through and it kind of scrambled it up, so it's just like a pile of like gore. And they're like, "Oh man, that sucks." But that means, if it's that kind of transportation, you're killed every time and then reconstructed. So it's really not you; it's a clone of you that appears on the spaceship. And they've come up with other interpretations. Not as Star Trek, because Star Trek it kind of like set that rigid path for itself, but like maybe like it opens up a wormhole. So like you go through a dimensional portal and you end up somewhere else. So you don't actually get vaporized. You just transfer, out of our reality for a minute, and that takes a shortcut.
Sure. Yeah, that's funny. So everyone dies every time, and that makes it horror, I would say.
That's like what's that movie? Is I think The Illusionist.
Oh, right. No, The
And like
Prestige, I think it's called.
The Prestige, yeah, where the guy like dies every time,
Yes.
and then yeah.
Yep, that's basic. Yeah, it's basically the same thing. So you think, in your opinion, should fiction authors be following the laws of physics as we understand them, or is there wiggle room?
I think there's wiggle room, but I think so. It's not like they necessarily need to follow the laws of physics, because we actually change our interpretation all the time. Like if you look at like an author from like 100 years ago and you look at an author now, and they both do a deep dive into like the scientific process, they're going to come up with different resolutions to a lot of things. So I think what you got to do is like for instance, I'll try and like scale this down. Like when I write like story, like I do a lot of stuff with like cosmic horror and stuff like that. So when I write sci-fi elements, I try not to like detail too much of the laws of physics going on, because our interpretation of that might change. So I try to keep that a little bit vague and a little bit general, but I figure most of the characters are seeing that stuff for the first time, so they wouldn't even know what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. So I was looking a little bit in the history of physics, and apparently the ancient Greeks, and there's tying into the planets. And for them, the planets are either literally or representative of the gods. So the cosmic horror thing in outer space, Lovecraft, it's almost like hard to separate that from the concept of these forces that are influencing us, whether you want to call that what astrology, or if you want to call that cosmic horror or gods. What do you think about that linkage?
Well, I think so. First of all, Neil deGrasse Tyson brought up something really interesting. And Lovecraft does this a lot. Like it's not from this world directly; it's from another dimension. It comes over, and it does all sorts of craziness. And what Neil deGrasse brought up that was really interesting is like if you go to another dimension, the laws might be slightly different. So basically, like if you took a wormhole or a Stargate and you suddenly went to another dimension, maybe the laws would not apply to your body. So all of a sudden you're a pile of mush.
Sure.
Because like gravity doesn't work the same, the attraction between atoms doesn't work the same. So you're not made to survive. But if it's from another dimension, it's like what Lovecraft did. You can basically make up anything you want because it's like who knows what the laws are there.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of Lovecraft, he wrote a lot about what he would call non-Euclidean geometry, angles that don't sit right in Dreams of the Witch
Right.
House, stuff like that.
Right.
So would you say that's an element of kind of what you're talking about a little bit?
I think he's playing a little bit with well, first of all, he was a smart guy. Like a lot of people think like that's all made up, and it is all made up, but it's like I think he was trying to follow some kind of like rigid patterns and then like talk about the alterations of some of those patterns. And I think that he brings up stuff that can't be described, and then he basically tells you it can't be described, but this is the best interpretation I can give you of it.
Right. Yeah. So our organs or our brain, it's just not capable of making sense, which would make sense. I mean, we're these
Right.
somewhat evolved apes down here. There's got to be a lot of stuff that we just can't process and make sense of. And how does that look to us when we actually have reached our limitations of understanding? It's going to look weird or whatever. So maybe that the angles look weird, but somebody could perceive them not weird, I guess.
Well, even if you time traveled backwards, which my understanding is that's impossible. You basically start a new universe when you time travel. But that aside, if you time travel backwards, a lot of concepts that are just like basic to you would not be understood by the people 100 years ago or 200 years ago or whatever. I think it was it Isaac Asimov who said or Arthur C. Clarke who said like every every technology that is more advanced than the population understands is interpreted as magic.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense to me. And this idea of coming up with what might be termed alien physics or physics outside of our ken. So a lot of the times with horror, sci-fi, or fantasy, we'll come up, particularly sci-fi, here's an alien creature, and it's usually just a humanoid. Oh, it's got a weird other part or something like that, because that's how we picture things, right? So that limitation would apply to the forces because we're like, oh, well, it's going to have a maybe slightly less gravity. Maybe there's an entirely different thing that we don't even get that's going on over there, right? So there's limited possibilities.
Right. Well, I think like diverting a little bit, I think that Neil deGrasse Tyson made another great point where he said, actually, the most realistic alien, invasion, whatever movie they've seen, is the Blob. Because, like, why would an alien species look like us? Who even knows that they have DNA? So like the Blob, there's just like this weird gelatinous like thing that comes to our world. Like that's probably what it'd be like again, like maybe from their colder environment, maybe they grew up on liquid methane instead of water, and like who knows their biology and their construction, and to make them all be more or less humanoid is I think that's a huge limitation.
It is a huge limitation. I do think also authors probably realize that people would relate more maybe to a humanoid creature as soon as you even start going
that's possible. Yeah.
reptilian. I don't care. Like I like making
I
unrelatable
think
characters.
that's why like Lovecraft was less liked back then and more liked now, because back then people were like, I'm having a hard time like picturing all this. It seems like very like unreal to me. And now people have like a broader mindset, you know. Plus people are used to like more horror. So like, yeah, I'm really tired of like the Jason Voorhees and the Freddy and whatever. I want something that kind of blows my mind.
Right. Yeah. So it's more than one standard deviation of weird. A werewolf, like, all right, it's a man, but it's also a wolf. All right,
Right,
cool.
right.
I get
But
that.
we've
That's
seen that,
fine.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then it's the Star Trek monsters. Oh, they're a person, but they have a weird forehead. Okay, that's nice. So
Usually William Shatner sleeps with them, but that's another
yeah, he's into a lot of, I mean, he's open-minded. That's cool to be sexually open-minded. But
well, he's also a little bit of a narcissist. Like
well,
the first episode they have where they have an interracial kiss, which it broke boundaries. A lot of people were like shocked by it. Like it was supposed to originally be Leonard Nimoy and what was it, Uhura, and Leonard Nimoy was supposed to kiss her, but William Shatner said, "No, it's got to be me. It's got to be me." So
he wanted to be the center of
yeah.
attention. Well, I guess in that case it was for a good cause, to expand, because Star Trek did do a lot in terms of maybe
Breaking social boundaries,
right,
yeah.
maybe their alien stuff was pretty limited, but for the time that it was written was probably pretty good. But yeah, we've gone beyond that. And so people can ironically go back to the 20s when Lovecraft was writing, and they crave something that's just more weird, more standards of deviation from just the norm. And I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, you do limit. Well, it's like, for instance, if you watch a show where they want to make character sympathetic. So have you seen, man, I can't think of what it is. The thing with this is not making good podcast thing. Sweet Tooth, I think it was called Sweet Tooth. It's dark fantasy.
Oh yeah, I love Sweet Tooth. Yeah, it's a series on Netflix, and it's like you start having like child hybrids, and there was like a virus, and they don't know if the hybrid is caused the virus, or and like kind of everything's descended into like anarchy. So you have like groups like you have in like in the apocalypse story, like The Walking Dead or whatever, where you have like some groups that are like really nasty and vicious. And so you have some that are like just trying to kill the hybrids, and some like want to experiment on them, and some want to save them. But yeah, it's a good show.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess without trying to give away too many spoilers, there are the hybrids were that they do worse things to are not mammalian hybrids, whereas the ones that we're supposed to like the most, like the cutest, the groundhog guy, he looks the most human, he acts the most human, and of course the deer guy, who is almost
The deer
entirely
boy,
human,
yeah.
just who has a couple of features. So the further you go away from human, further away from mammal, the less I think your average reader or watcher can relate. So that might be an argument why people write less blob characters, but I'm way more interested in those characters personally.
Well, I think too, it's like you're right. The audience probably responds more to the humanoid, the more human-like creatures, but the people on the show don't. Like they judge them all as being
That's true.
equally, bad or equally good. They don't really, they don't say, oh, this one seems to have like a little bit better vocabulary, or this one, they're just like for or against them.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. They're not speciesist, but the viewer is definitely going to be speciesist, I think. So it's worth keeping in mind. I don't believe in pandering to the reader or viewer or anything like that, but just in terms of something.
I wonder if the hybrids would be like I guess they're different species. Like they're all partially Homo sapien,
Right.
but they're also one's like part beaver, one's part deer, one's part pig. It's like, so yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think expanding the sphere of compassion and relatability is something we should be trying to do. So it's nice to be, okay, here's the blob. It's a gelatinous form based on, yeah, like you said, it doesn't breathe oxygen necessarily, or it comes from a place where maybe the gravity is so much that all you can do is ooze around. I think that's way more of an interesting challenge. Certainly as a writer and as a reader, I like to be challenged, but your average person doesn't. Like your average person wants to listen to not the deep cuts on the classic rock station. They want to hear Satisfaction over and over and over again on their drive to work, right? So just that's just how it is. But yeah, we don't have to pander to it. And I rarely do. That's why I have only so many readers, but whatever. But what I want to ask you also is, so what about physics scares you?
Well, there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot that you know. There's a lot that's really dangerous to you that we didn't even think of. And there's so many weird things going on. You're like, what? Like at the end of the day, how is that going to affect my livelihood? Like for instance, like that space and time are kind of a continuum. So like it's like as you approach greater masses, like time slows down, and then this whole thing about it's because light beams need to move at a constant speed, so time slows down. They're still moving at the same speed. It's just like they're going around a larger object. It's like there's a lot of stuff that like is on the edge of us understanding what's the forces at play are. So that can be very dangerous. I think like Lovecraft said this, the fear of the unknown is the greatest fear out there.
Yeah, because you don't have your pulse on what things could be. And that's why physics to me, it's just harder to understand for me. I don't get it almost hardly ever, whereas I kind of get biology to a certain degree. So, of course, everything is played upon by physics. But what do you think? Is there any linkage between, say, the supernatural and physics? Any thoughts on that?
Well, there might be, but the thing is, like, well, first of all, primitive humans thought that everything they didn't understand was supernatural. So there was a fire god, a rain god, a water god, whatever. So as we've isolated processes and so on, we have less and less gods. You get down to monotheism and so on. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a god thing, and there are different interpretations of spirituality. Like some people think it's like one big gray bearded guy in the sky. Some people think it's like, kind of cosmic influences. But that's why I say like there's a lot of weird stuff out there. Like the way one electron acts might affect the way an electron acts all the way around the orbit of Jupiter. We don't know what the connection is. We don't know what's going on. And like I said, we might be living in 3 dimensions, but they're actually 5, or 6 or whatever, they're actually in place. So we don't understand, everything going on in the linkage between them.
Yeah. Well, certainly interdimensional beings is a frightening thing, something that's just right here, but just a different layer that we can't access, but they can sometimes access us. That's a terrifying concept.
Kind of like Interstellar, where he's in the library, he's like moving stuff around. His daughter just his books, yeah.
Sure. And would you say the film? Have you seen Donnie Darko?
Yes.
So that's one of my favorite movies. I hadn't watched it for years and years, and then I watched it a couple of years ago, afraid it wouldn't hold up. I think I enjoyed it just as much. So they touch on physics and stuff like that, although I hear it in a kind of half-assed way.
Well, I think it was more of like an indie project, and like that's the way that they approach it, like a low budget. Like I'm not going to do deep dive into researching this. And probably not too many people can check it out. And then it blew up, which is good for it's good for the author and it's good for the artist, but it's maybe credibility is at stake there.
Yeah, apparently there's some holes, but it does deal with time travel, and some of it, I guess. Well, if the concept of time travel doesn't necessarily hold up, but yeah, there's some inconsistencies, but it almost seems like the solace of physics can be, even if we don't understand it, there seems to be a consistency to it. this is the force, even if we don't understand it, it's going along this way. But to me, it would be more frightening if it was in flux, as in if something like gravity, sure, oh, now it's different. In 7 years, it's different, which
Well,
maybe it is. I don't know.
there's one thing I think that's really interesting about gravity, because like, people like, for instance, like, with evolution, people are like, oh, it's just a theory. It's like, well, gravity is just a theory. But here's the thing: the law is, and the law of evolution is it works. How it works is a theory. So theories mean, we're still working on that. We're not 100% sure. We just know that it applies. And I think with gravity, it's like maybe our theories on why it works the way it works are incorrect. So the law that it works, how it works could change. And it could be because of, the different forces, at play that we are not aware of.
Yeah, that could well be. And another thing I was just thinking of is, so what you were saying before, and I agree with that, the idea of magic is just something we don't understand yet, because if it's a thing that can happen, even if there's a wizard that goes blah, blah, and now you disappear,
Right.
There's going to be something that can explain that, in terms of there would be a law that even if we don't understand it. So if you write a ghost or something like that, you can maybe make up your physics of it, but it should be applied consistently. So there would be a physics of ghosts in a sense, right? Like a ghost can go through these materials and shoot out ectoplasm in this way. Would you say that there's an element of physics in that?
I mean, it's possible. And actually, some of, I think, the like better writers like Lovecraft have done this, like Dreams of the Witch House. Like, basically, his a guy's sister dies and he's trying to find some way to bring her back. So, but she went to another dimension. So he's trying to go to that dimension and bring her back. And of course, it being Lovecraft, I think it is horribly wrong. But it's like, ghosts could just be beings from another dimension. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know.
Right. Yeah. And I think the job of the author is just come up with whatever you want, but try to keep it consistent to itself. Have an internal consistency to it seems to be the only rule. Don't change it around as it goes along, even if you have a bullcrap version of it. Just keep it going, because say the transporter in Star Trek, okay, it was a bit of, they fudged that or whatever, but as a plot device, I guess it works. And if it's consistent throughout, although it probably wasn't, but nobody really actually cared, is the reality, right?
Right.
So it's just, like nerds like me would care about biological fake things, and maybe nerds like you, like, well, the physics is off there, but most people don't give a crap, do they?
Well, my girl tells me I'm a nerd all the time. So, but I think that you got to be careful and just do a little bit of like a little bit of a dive into something that you don't understand how it works. Like, for instance, with the Star Trek transporters, they kind of worked until it's like, oh, well, because it works this way, it did this. And then, all right, you kind of like screwed yourself there, because now you said it has to be this. So like when they recombine somebody, it's just like a pile of like gore. It's like, oh, so you're saying that everyone, gets like pulled apart and then recombined. And by saying that, you're saying it basically kills them and then rebuilds them.
Yeah, the internal logic is lacking a bit. That's definitely true. Yeah. And that's probably why I don't dabble in that realm very much, certainly not much in the sci-fi stuff, because I don't know how to deal with that. I've made alien creatures. I recently wrote one. There tend to always be reptilian of some sort, because that is the closest other that I can also process and understand. Amphibian reptilian is sort of that transition period away. But yeah, if I had a better imagination, I could go further into, I don't know if it would be a gas, there'd be particles. I bet you most of the life if there's stuff out there, it's probably more microbial. Like, why would it not be? Just seems like
Well,
the
it's
best
also
form.
possible, like the universe is so vast that, there are like whole civilizations that could have risen up, developed technology far superior to ours, but still never reached us and then died out. So, by the
Possible.
time that we might ever get to the point where we can travel to, their planet of origin, maybe the sun went supernova, maybe the civilization died out like 10 years or 100 years, 1,000 years prior. It's like it's just there's so much that we don't know. And they constantly like they only recently managed to photograph a black hole, even though it was a Einstein theory forever. They still don't know if dark matter exists, but they're trying to figure it out, and like dark energy, and they're like, well, our calculation is this, but and the calculations are often off. Like they thought the universe was gonna like, expand and then eventually get to a point where it starts contracting, but it just keeps expanding even faster, and they don't know why. So there's lots of stuff, that they just don't understand what's to play.
Right. And that's what I ultimately like most about physics and quantum physics and outer space. It puts us in our place as humanity, literally. It puts us in our, here's where we are. And it's also, there are all these things we don't understand. We go around as humans pretending we know everything, and we have all these fancy ideologies, which actually are, most people believe a lot of bullshit just on a daily basis. So it's really funny that, yeah, we definitely know how the whole universe works. It's like probably almost certainly not.
We don't even like the oceans are like 80% explored. That's our own planet. Like,
Right.
how many the planets are out there? There are more stars than there are sands on all of our beaches in the entire world. So those are just stars. And like our star has how many planets? I mean, it depends on whether you consider Pluto a planet, whether you think Planet X exists, but we have at least 8 planets. If there are that many stars, more stars than all the sands on all of our beaches, there are probably millions and billions of planets out there. So yeah, there's a lot we don't know.
A lot,
I just
yeah,
keep going back to
there's
that.
a lot we don't know. And I guess the question is whether the forces at play in all of these galaxies are physics, so physical matter, or if there is life, as in biology. And for some reason, that tends to be the question, but I don't even know if it should be. I don't even know if it matters necessarily if there is, quote, a microbe or a mammal or a sentient thing out there. I think we are all, we're certainly human centric to a large degree. And, even including myself, we're very life centric. And why is it more important for there to be a fuzzy little critter out there than just some sort of rock that is spinning that has validity and importance on its own, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think, I mean, I think that we are kind of like we're evolutionary, like programmed towards certain things. The reason why like we like animals so much, like pets so much, is because we're evolutionarily programmed to like small young creatures, because we're programmed to like babies, so that we like care for them and develop emotion for them, and that makes us like dogs. They're like big sappy eyes, and they're like crawling in your lap and whatever. So I you know I don't know. It's like, I think we're kind of programmed to like stuff by evolution, but and we're thinking like, it kind of depends on the person. Some people say self-aware is the definition, which means you can look in the mirror and then you recognize yourself. You know, some people say life, but then again, like a deer is alive. Okay, if you take that to a further extreme, cockroach is alive. So are you saying that we can kill, cockroaches but not deer? Why? They're both alive.
Right.
You know, and it might even be that like self-awareness and sentience is just a very complex butterfly effect. So we're not actually self-aware. We've just like so many steps removed from like a deer that that we can recognize ourselves, but that's just like a biological advancement. That doesn't mean that we're This is very complex.
No, I love that though. I love what you're saying there. And that's definitely a lot to kind of think about over time. And I definitely am going to. But I'm curious, as we wind down here, have you tried to explore any of these concepts in any of your work?
I well, the first I'm rewriting my first novel right now. Like, I got the rights back from my publisher finally.
Hmm.
It was a nightmare, but I finally got back. And actually, Jeff Strand helped me a lot to get the rights back. Like, the publisher wanted $1,000. I'm like, dude, you've had the rights for 9 years. And I didn't even mention how many times they're like jerking me around in sales and not paying the bill or whatever. So I got the rights back and I'm rewriting it. And in that first novel, I was like, I guess a lot more emo. Like, I was also a lot younger when I wrote it. I mean, that was like 15 years ago. But it's like I'm talking about all these concepts. So even if it's not occurring right in front of the main character or the main protagonist,
Right.
it's still he's like going over all these concepts. But in a way, it's almost like, if you read it now, it's almost like purple prose. It's like he's in the middle of something and it's distracting to go through all of his thoughts that are not related to what's going on right at this moment. So, I had to cut some down, but that is addressed in some of it. And I love to do like kind of cosmic horror. Like, I'm heavily inspired by Lovecraft, so I don't want to copy him. I hate when people I don't even like when people do like the Cthulhu mythos because I figure
Mhm.
that's his thing.
Right.
Why
Right.
do his thing? But I do take him as an inspiration, and I try and have like weird creatures from other dimensions at play, like causing havoc, and some people are for it and some people are against it, and we have oppressive oligarchs and all this sort of stuff. So I try and bring some of those elements in, but I try not to delve too deep into specifics because I could be wrong. Like, people are proven wrong all the time. And the last thing I want is people like, if you read those like 1920 sci-fi novels, but they're like breathing and they're in space and they don't have helmets on.
Hmm.
I don't want that to happen to my work.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good precaution to have. So besides rewriting that novel, what are you working on and where can folks find your work?
uh Thank you. Mostly Amazon. Like, Amazon's like the big monolith that So even like I often use Drafted Digital. I was interviewing somebody else and they told me about that. And Drafted Digital is great because you get yourself everywhere, like Barnes and Nobles. All the you know all the streaming services, all that. But I still go to Amazon. So if I like the Never Dead, when I put it out on Amazon. Amazon lets you do like it's like a print on demand. So you don't even pay for it up front, where you can do like a paperback, a hardcover, and a Kindle. ACX, which is a division of Audible, or they work with Audible, will often do a royalty share where you don't pay anything up front. Just the person who does the audio version of your book gets a certain percentage of sales. So like my latest book, The Never Dead, is available in 4 formats just on Amazon. And then I also put it in Draft Digital, so it's actually available on all the streaming services as well, like Apple and Google and Barnes and Nobles and stuff like that.
Very cool. Well, yeah, that's smart to get it out there as many ways as possible. Well, Dan, it was great to have you on the podcast talking about what I'm going to call now the horror of physics, screw biology. And
that's real horror, yeah.
that's as horrifying as it gets. So yeah, thanks for stepping into my nightmare.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking a trip with me through Josh's worst nightmare, where I, Josh Schlossberg, survey the dark landscape of biological horror fiction. If you don't want to miss any of the great, and sometimes disturbing, episodes I've got planned for you, be sure to subscribe to Josh's Worst Nightmare on a variety of podcast platforms. You can also sign up for Josh's Worst Nightmare e-newsletter, where I share a whole squirming mess of bio-horror along with my latest dark scribblings at joshsworstnightmare.com. Speaking of which, if you haven't already picked up a copy of Charwood, my eco-folk horror novel from Agata Try It, or Maline, my cosmic horror novella from D&T Publishing, You can do so at your local bookstore or order from them through bookshop.org or indiebound.org, or go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, or godless.com. Darkest regards, Josh Schlossberg.